Well, hi there, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Inner Game of Winning TV. This is take 2 because we did do this interview a little while ago, and for some reason, the IT gremlins had a little bit of a field day. They were playing tricks with us. So I am so excited that Chris was willing to come back because he has got some amazing gold nuggets to share with you. Let me tell you a tiny bit about Chris, and then I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more. So he is an 8th degree black belt master instructor. He is a former US National Taekwondo Champion. And I've got to tell you, and he's a professional speaker, and he's got best-selling books, and he has got so many amazing tips, tools, and techniques to share with you today. So without any further ado, I am going to introduce you to Chris and bring him on. Hey there, Chris.
How you doing? Great to see you. Great to see you.
Oh, thank you for coming back. I so appreciate you.
Absolutely.
So how is it over there in Colorado?
You know, so far so good. It's been a good day. I have to admit, I've been spending most of my day in front of the computer on Zoom calls, but so far so good.
Well, not quite Zoom, but StreamYard.
Right.
So I really appreciate you coming back. So, because we had the best interview and I was so bummed because it flowed beautifully. So I know this one's going to be even better.
Awesome.
So I know, but no one else that's watching this does, and it's going to Facebook and YouTube, etc., my personal page, my business page, etc. Tell us how you stumbled across Taekwondo in the first place and what the motivation to do it was, because that was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. Yeah, it's funny. I told this story dozens of times, if not more, but I always still love telling it. I started my martial art training back in 1973. I was a short little chubby kid who was enamored with a TV show that we had in the States. I don't know if you had in Australia at that time, but it was called Kung Fu. And yes. It was about the Shaolin monk that was walking across the American desert, and he would get confronted by these bad guys, and he would take care of them using his Kung Fu. And when you're 10 years old, it's the coolest thing you've ever seen in your life, right? And so I begged my mom to let me go to my first class. And I guess what I'd love your listeners to understand is back in the early 70s, martial arts was very different in the United States, at least, than it is now. It was very obscure. There weren't a lot of professional schools out there. So I went to a little class that opened up in my small community center in my small town in southeastern Wisconsin. But I saw these people doing these amazing movements and with this power and grace. And I just totally fell in love. I felt like I came home. And then about 3 years after that, I'd meet a man that would change my life forever. In fact, I still consider him to be my instructor. His name is Grandmaster J.K. Lee. And one of the first times I was in his class, I was seated in the corner of the room, and I was sitting down. My legs were spread wide. I was stretching out, getting ready for the morning's class. And he walked down to the mat like he always did, because he has this amazing presence and this amazing power. And he was surveying all the students. And pretty soon I realized that he was staring directly at me. And before I could move a muscle, he had come over and sat down in front of me. And he put one foot on the inside of one leg, another foot on the inside of the other. He grabbed the ends of my belt, and with one push-pull, he split me out to 180 degrees.
Ouch.
Ouch. And like I like to say, I learned two really important life lessons that day. Is number one, Catherine, is anyone can do the splits one time.
Yes, can you get up to it, sir?
Right. But the second lesson, and this was such a quintessential part in my life, and and I think about this, how many years ago that's been, but he just stopped and he looked at me directly in the eyes and he said, "I will make you a champion. I will make you a champion." And man, when you're 13, you somebody says that to you, you believe them, right? I mean, it was a time in my life where this man that I so revered, so respected, called out greatness in me. And so that was just a turning point in my life, because it not only meant so much to me personally, but then later on in the work that I would do, not only with martial arts students, but now with my coaching clients, is to kind of follow that same way of help in holding people capable to their greatness.
Yeah, because I know we talked about it in our original interview. It's like when your mom or your dad or your caretaker or your grandparents, tell you you're wonderful and you'll make it. That's awesome. But it's not the same as when someone outside of your family tells you and believes in you. It was the same for me until I went to London and found a teacher, Una Billings, bless her, has passed, but Una Billings TV School of Dance in Hammersmith, who said to me that I could make it as a dancer, because I was told I'd never make it as a dancer. Too old, too tall, flat feet, turning hips, forget it. That's when I blossomed, because she believed in me.
Isn't that amazing? And nothing changed with you in that instance physically, right? It was all what was going on in your mind and your heart. And it was the same with me. And it just put me on a whole different trajectory. Had he have said something like, wow, you don't have any talent, God forbid, that might have had a whole other trajectory for me. But because he said that, and when we're that age, I was 13 at the time, we're very malleable, right? We just, and anytime someone who I believe that we really love, respect, revere says something like that, we soak it up like a sponge.
Yeah. And the opposite effect can happen. As you were saying, when I peak performance coach a lot of athletes and performers, right? And I had the pleasure of working with Tanya Pearson's full-time ballet students. And I was working with this beautiful girl, and I won't mention names, but, and she had callbacks to the Royal Ballet and the English National, and she was just a mess. She was riddled with anxiety, and she didn't think she was going to get it, and she was worried, etc. And we did a lot of wonderful things, and I totally reframed everything. And I said to her, I know you've always wanted to get into the Royal, but the Royal may not be the right fit for you, because when we audition as a dancer, we're handing over all the power to the people that are auditioning us, right? And I said, why don't you go over and audition them? So I reframed it and did a whole lot of other things. Anyway, she went off and she got into both companies. But she came back, and she had about 2 months before she took up that position. And she rang me and said, Catherine, I need another session. I can't stop eating. And I'm eating chocolate. And she said, I know I'm sabotaging myself. Yeah. And I said to her, well, there must be something we have not dealt with that's lurking below the surface.
Right.
It turned out that she was an associate with the Australian Ballet. The Australian Ballet tours around and finds young children that have potential, and they go down to the Aussie Ballet to work with them in the school holidays. Well, some wicked witch down there had told her when she was about 8 or 9 that she would never make it because she didn't have enough turnout. Oh. So she had held on to that. Now, the Royal Ballet had accepted her.
Amazing.
Hello. And she's at home and she's going, but. So that's how much impact, if somebody as a child, someone tells us something that we can't do. And that's, I think, so crucial for anyone listening. Just because an adult tells you you can't do it, prove them wrong. I proved my critics wrong. So yes, we can have amazing mentors, but if we have someone that tells us we can't, just don't believe it.
Absolutely. And what I would add to that too is if you're in a role where you have the ability to influence young people,
yes,
understand the power of your words as well.
Now, listen, Chris, when you say you are a chubby 10-year-old, I have had the pleasure of, we both were members of the National Speakers Colorado chapter, and I've met you. You're like taller than me. I'm 5'11". You're how tall?
I'm about 6'1", something like that.
And you are far from chubby. So I'm having a bit of a challenge wrapping my head around a chubby 10-year-old.
Well, but it's really true. And, my mom called me Husky, just to be clear, right? But, that's who I was. But when I found martial arts, that gave me this way of expression. And, and then it gave me a place where I found my confidence, and then I began to grow. And then, and I had always had this vision of like loving superheroes, right? And then seeing people who could do superhero-like things. I was just so in love with the martial arts that, I didn't care what I looked like. I just wanted to go out there and do it. And pretty soon nature took its course and I was able to move out of that little chubby period. But no, I very much was. In fact, You talk about childhood memories. I remember very clearly being called Chris Natzke by some of the kids. Everyone goes, oh, right? But
so cool.
That's part of it, right? That's part of what happens when we grow up. And just like you said, we need to overcome those. And I hope that if anyone's ever had an experience like that, because it has helped me become more sensitive to others in that regard. And that if we have that instance, is to know, if we've been on the receiving end of that, is know that we can always do work with that experience, not only on ourselves, but also helping others that might be dealing with that. Yeah.
So you went along as a 10-year-old, you fell in love with it, you found your home, and this is what you wanted to do. When did you decide that you really wanted to go further with it?
I think we may have talked about this last time, and it's so funny because sometimes when you talk about life purpose, some people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s still are searching for that. And when I was 11 years old, so I started martial arts when I was 10. When I was 11 years old, I was in fifth grade, fifth year of elementary school here in the States, and we had to do an autobiography. And so I still have it. It's right behind me in my file somewhere. And I wrote, when I was 1 year old, I did this. When I was 2 years old, I did this. And then when it came to 10 years old, I said, when I was 10 years old, I started Taekwondo. I am now a blue belt. And one day I want to own my own school.
Oh, that's
so
right.
It was planted that early. And, and I can't say that then as I got older, then of course, all the practicalities of life show up. And I really kind of gave up on that dream. But then later on, when I was in my early 30s, there came an opportunity for me to leave my corporate job, which I was doing quite well in. I had two small boys, 10 and 6, that, and I was a sole breadwinner in our family. But my former wife, the wife at the time, now former wife, was just so incredibly supportive and said, hey, I know we'd been together since high school. She goes, I know it's always been your dream. You need to go for it. And my God, God bless her that she so encouraged me. And I did. And, it's interesting because for your listeners out there, I think that sometimes when we take those leaps in our lives, I mean, at least my experience, it was not only the most exhilarating, but it was also the most petrifying time in my life. In fact, Mr. Big, martial art guy here fell prey to panic attacks. Because it was so, because talk about those limiting beliefs, somewhere down deep inside of me, I had this huge fear of failure. What if I fail at this? I really hadn't failed majorly at anything up until that point. Now, nothing was further from the truth in terms of my skill set, my intention, all my skill, everything I could do. But it didn't matter to my mind, right?
Sure.
And so much so, sometimes people listen to others that are, have had success in certain ventures, and they think, man, things have been easy. But those panic attacks got so acute for me, Catherine, that I ended up spending the night in the emergency room. And the doctor, I remember him very clearly telling me in the morning, saying, if I wouldn't have been such a well-conditioned athlete, I most likely would have gone into cardiac arrest.
Wow.
Right. So when people say, oh, it's been easy for you, no, it hasn't. I've been petrified. But, the thing that I learned from that experience is, in my mind at the time, it was so irrational. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm 33 years old. I'm leaving this corporate world. If I fail, my life is over. Oh my gosh, right? Now I would coach somebody and say, you're only 33. If it fails, just do something else. But yes. I couldn't see that in myself, right? Couldn't see it in myself. But I have to say that once I finally made that leap, then everything opened up, and the school was incredibly successful for the 17 years I had it. So anyway, very, very grateful for that experience. But if anyone's out there thinking, man, I don't want to take that leap, it's too scary, what if I fail? My experience is, if that's where your heart is, go for it. Be smart, obviously, be smart, get your training that you need, but go for it, because my life would not be the same as it is today if I wouldn't have taken that chance.
I find it interesting. There's some parallels in that mine wasn't so much a scary leap, but you gave up on your dream, but your dream did not give up on you.
That's so true.
And I gave up on my dream because I got told at 16, I got laughed at when I went into ballet studios, because I started dance at 13, which is very old. And I did jazz and tap 6 times a week. And at 16, when I announced to everyone, I'm going to be a professional dancer, I didn't want to be a ballerina, but I wanted to be a commercial dancer, and I knew I needed my ballet. So I went off to these really elite ballet schools and got consistently told, over and over and over to all these different schools that I'd never make it. And so I did give up on my dream. I was teaching for my teacher, Littleys. I had this natural ability to teach, but I was just dancing for my own enjoyment. I did have a beautiful teacher that I used to go into Bodenviese's Dance Centre in Sydney, and Margaret Chappell, who we affectionately called Chappie. She believed in me.
Yeah.
However, I didn't ever feel like I would make it as a professional dancer. And as fate would have it, I fell in love with a guy that was English that came out to Australia on a working holiday, followed him to England. He got a Trek America tour guide job, chuffed off to he flew out of Heathrow as I flew in, ironically. And I went, well, I'm here in London. I might as well do some dance classes. Found this school, rang and said, can I do some casual classes, thinking I was just doing casual classes. And then Una pulled me aside and she said, have you considered trying out for full time? And of course, I recited what I'd been told. Oh, no, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough stuff. I'm too old. I'm too tall. I've got flat feet, turning hips. She said, darling, she said, you've got the perfect body. You've got the musicality. You've got style. You've got grace. You've got everything going for you aside from your technique. And the ballet master at our school was Fernand Monet. He was the ballet master for the Royal Ballet when they went on tour. And guess who got to have private lessons with him?
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
So Una believing in me flipped that switch of I'm not good enough. And, he had a pair of point shoes in the corner and he said, try those on. I'll have you in those in 6 months. And he did. So, we both have that parallel of I gave up on my dream, but my dream did not give up on me. So that's when you know that you really are here for a purpose. And then I had the confidence. Then I auditioned for Miss Doris, the famous Bluebells. But I didn't take the job because it was like she auditioned 6 months ahead of time and I've never made it through an English winter ever. I came home and I opened my first dance school. So I think that sometimes we really are destined for particular things in life. And even though we give up on something, it's like the universe, God, Allah, Buddha, whatever you believe in goes, oh, no, we got other plans for you.
It is so true. When I was going through the worst of all my panic and anxiety around making that decision, I would go to people, and I think that maybe that there were sometimes I would go and have discussions hoping they would tell me, yeah, you really should keep it safe and not go for it, right? Because then I'd have an excuse. Someone told me no one did that. I mean, I can't think of anyone. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, you're born for this, whatever. And it was a great support. But it was interesting how deep I was going to see if there was an out in any such way. In fact, I don't know if I shared this story with you before, but it's one that I share now when I speak, because I think it so solidifies the importance of having a why, of why when we're going to take a leap like that. And as I shared, I was having a lot of anxiety around this move to a new career and opening up the studio. And I had already signed a lease on a building here in the Denver area. And my wife at the time was kind of working as the general contractor, building it out so we could, lay the mats and all that. And so one day after work on a Friday, I came back and only one person at my place of work knew I was going to be leaving, right? So I was having all this anxiety around. I walk in and I totally flipped out, Catherine. I said to her, this is the stupidest idea I've ever had. We need to get out of this lease. I'm going to call the attorney on Monday. And she's looking like, what are you talking about? So she told me to go home and we discuss it later. Now, she didn't use those nice of words, but that's in essence what she told me. So after dinner, I had all my points in a row. This is why this is such a bad idea. And I listed all of them. And she sat quietly and listened to me. And then she said, I'll tell you what, I supported you getting into this venture. And if you want to get out, I'll support you as well. I just have one request. And I said, well, that's fair. What's your request? She said, my one request is that you sit our two sons down and you explain to them why you're choosing not to go for your dream. Right? I mean, she sunk my battleship. I mean, I could not have that conversation. And what I realized in that moment, I mean, God bless her for that. I mean, such an intuitive thing to say, and the strength to say that too. I'm just so grateful, as well as I think the tens of thousands of people I've taught since that time. But the idea there is that I realized that it wasn't just for me, but there was a big why there to show this example to my boys. Because I had told them ever since they were little kids, they could do anything they put their minds to. Now here I was getting to do it. I was ready to pack and run. So anyway, I love sharing that story now. I'm just so grateful because my life would have been totally different if I would have let fear lead me to where I thought I was supposed to go.
And tell me about, we talked about it in our previous interview, and I thought it was really, really useful for any athletes and or performers that are listening to this, or even people that are high achievers in the workplace for that matter, because there's such a thing as burnout in that environment as well. So you were training for the national championships.
Yeah.
And you kind of overtrained. Yeah,
I'm not ashamed to admit that was kind of a tendency with me. I mean, at one time I had this mindset that if I wasn't training, the other people were, and I was behind. And so there was one particular time I was getting ready for a big event, and I was training, and I started to feel really worn out. And, you know, I'm blessed with a very high degree of zest and energy, but man, I was getting, as you said, I was getting burned out, and I was really struggling going through my training. So I went to my homeopathic doctor here in the Denver area, who I absolutely had a beautiful relationship with. He was a former Mr. Colorado bodybuilder. So he knew what training was about, and he could always set me straight. For whatever reason, well, I know why I listened to him, because he was right. And so he did his whole thing on me. He did his analysis and had me on his machine. And he looked at me, he said, Chris, I have to tell you, you are getting ready for a major injury. He goes, I'm not just talking about pulling a hamstring. I'm talking like tearing a hamstring. He said, you need to totally cut down on your training. And I'm like, oh, I can't do that, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. He goes, you need to keep it down to 100 kicks a week in your training. And I was like, well, I was doing at that time, Catherine, like 1,000 to 1,200 kicks in a training session, right? And I said, well, I could keep it to 100 kicks a day. He goes, no, a week. I'm like, oh my gosh, right? And then he looked at me and he said, listen, you need to remember, and you need to realize this one very important thing. Rest is part of your training. Rest is part of your training. Now, up until that moment, I mean, I knew lifting weights, you alternate body parts every other day, but it never, ever occurred to me. But then what he also did is he really helped me through visualization exercises. So that's what I did, is I flipped the switch and, pulled back on physically, but man, at least 3 times a day, I was totally engulfed into the visualization of what I wanted to create. And I had one of my better performances that I ever had, So it was a huge learning experience for me in so many levels. And I think, so many of us out there think that we just need to keep working harder. And I have to admit, I was driven because I didn't want to fail. It wasn't like I was so much driven because I wanted to succeed. I was driven because I didn't want to look bad, which, in the short term might help, but in the long term, it's not sustainable. So anyway, that was one of my key life lessons as an athlete, to be sure.
And was that when you actually did win the US National?
No, actually that story happened, I believe it was 2000, when I was getting ready to test for my 6th degree black belt. And that's when that particular thing happened. But what happened, I didn't learn the lesson totally, because both in 1998 and in 1999, I had injuries going into the competitions as well. So, it definitely was something that I've had to learn the hard way. So if I could say anything to your listeners, listen to me, listen to your bodies, be smart, be efficient in your training. Training harder isn't necessarily better than training smarter, to be clear.
Now, you also shared in that last interview, I think, that you were injured when you did win the championship.
I was.
And you had to come up with a really clever strategy.
Yeah.
What was about that?
Yeah. What was happening is I had, like I said, I was overtraining and had tweaked a hamstring in my right leg. And so I went into the first match in 1999 in the national championships. And in Taekwondo, what you do is you have multiple rounds in each match. So you have 3 rounds, and this is full contact fighting. So you can win by knockout or you can lose by knockout. So it tends to be a little intense. And it was the 3rd round of the first match. And I did a spin kick, that was one of my favorite techniques. And the guy blocked it. And when I did it, I felt my hamstring seize. But what helped me in that is up until then, I had done a lot of visualization and worked with hypnosis, knowing that I was injured going in and saying, okay, I don't want to re-injure, but if it does, how am I going to react to that? And I had visualized that so many times about how I'd be able to move through that obstacle. So went to my coach, said, hey, the hamstring just went. He massaged it out a little bit. He wrapped it, and then I went underneath. I remember it was in Daytona Beach, Florida, at Embry-Riddle University. Went underneath the bleachers and just got into a deep meditation, and just saw myself being successful and doing techniques that I could do in order to avoid straining that leg. And I went on and won the national championship. So. And I can almost guarantee you, had I not done that visualization training beforehand, and not be able to deal with it, I probably would have, I've been in my head and not been able to
panicked, and then
to be clear.
Yeah, it's amazing. And part of that, I have a 5-part ritual that I actually teach my clients, and part of it has to do, and it's things that they do leading up to their competitions as well as on the actual day. And there's a meditation as part of it, and there's visualizing, and it's in their preferred learning style, and there's a script that they've written for exactly how it's going to happen, as if it's already happened, and it's written in really juicy languaging, and it's in their preferred learning style as well. So the mind is so powerful. Tell me about what percentage you feel in any type of sport, but obviously to do with Taekwondo for you. How much do you feel is the physical skills when it comes to success, and how much do you feel is to do with your mindset?
Yeah, great question. And what's interesting is when you compete at that level, on a national level, that the difference in terms of physicality and physical skill is not that great. I mean, they're all very good athletes,
haven't they?
You see that in the Olympics, right? I mean, what do they win a 100-meter dash by? Hundredths of a second. So I would say, and this is, I've never done this scientifically. I've never taken a survey, but it could be like a 90-10 split. I mean, so much of that is important. And I guess part of that is that, we all know what it is to train and prepare our bodies for it. But man, that extra little percentage in terms of the, of our mindset. And I'll give you a great example. In 1998 in the United States, I took second. I took silver. And I actually, and if you were to ask me, and even my coach and people that watched, I actually fought better that year. And I beat my opponents by higher point totals, etc. But before the final match, I had, in the semifinals, I had beaten the person who had taken the silver medal the year before. Okay. And so now my coach comes up and he goes, man, that was an awesome match. You're awesome. You're right on track. You know what? That guy that you just fought took second last year. This guy you've got in the finals, I've seen him. He's not anywhere close to as good as that guy. So I started to let my guard down, thinking that was my match. Oh man. And it wasn't like the guy hurt me. He just outfoxed me. And he beat me by points. And I was so frustrated because still to this day, I think I was better than he was, but he was better at that match. And I take my hat off to him. He beat me. But it was a great lesson for me on how we need to not only prepare ourselves before, but we need to stay sharp mentally throughout. We need to keep our focus very keen and very acute because I let my guard down and I paid for it.
Yeah. And also that, I don't want to say cockiness, but that, oh yeah, I've got this kind of thing.
Totally.
It's you've got to constantly be going, okay, I have to be in the zone. And
in the zone. That's a great way of putting it. I let myself get out of the zone because I watched this guy too. And he's like, yeah, he's good, but he wasn't as good as the guy that I had just beaten. I will say that, but I let myself get out of the zone. That's a great way of putting it. And but what it did for me, as much as I would have loved to win, we oftentimes learn so many greater lessons in defeat than we do victory. And learned a great lesson from that. And it was also something that I could impart onto my students and my clients later on as well about the need, because I experienced it.
Now, tell me, you have, so you talk about having conscious persistence. Talk to me about what that means.
Yeah. One of my favorite concepts that I speak about, because I think that in our lives, we have most people that have any type of success have shown persistence, right? I mean, people know what it's like to work hard and move through obstacles and get their work done. But I always joke with audiences when I talk about this is, have you ever gone to a meeting, left the meeting, driven home, 40 minutes later, you're driving up your driveway. You have no idea how you got there, right? Because we're not conscious.
We're on autopilot.
We're on autopilot, and we do that in life. And so conscious persistence, in my mind, is allowing ourselves to be present during that, whatever we're in. And, where I get myself in the worst trouble is when I'm projecting into the future. I'm not as bad in terms of regretting the past. I can let that go pretty well. But in terms of, thinking and projecting in the future and the things that may go wrong. But when I'm at my best, I'm super present, right? I'm super present. And, the other thing too is that those obstacles that we come across and that ability to be persistent, that's where I think as human beings, we really find our greatest joy and we're happiest. If you ask almost anyone, I challenge anyone to ask a question of people and ask them the parts of their times in their life that they're most proud of, they'll almost always tell you a story of how they overcame an obstacle, right?
Oh, yeah.
They'll always say that, right? And so this idea of persistence is so important. In fact, we say in martial arts that a black belt is a white belt that never quit. Right?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's not the person with the most talent, because I have about, I guess, 1,200 plus students that I promoted to black belt to date. I just had 20 of them on Saturday. We had a black belt testing here in Denver. But I can think of only two, Catherine, that when I first met them, they had every absolute skill it took to be a black belt. Focus, concentration, flexibility, courage, all that stuff. Only two that had everything at the beginning. But there were another 1,198 that got there. And what I found is the ones that had an obstacle go through, they just, once they were able to overcome it, that's where they started to catch their traction. And there were a whole bunch of other students that came that had all the talent and never made it there. Why is that? I think it's because when we are consciously persistent and we overcome those obstacles, now it takes a deeper root inside of us.
I saw exactly the same thing in my performing arts school as well. Pardon me. Often the person that came in that had all the talent in the world, had the turnout, had the flexibility, there wasn't a challenge there.
That's right. Exactly.
So they kind of left and
And it's interesting. We have a fellow member at the National Speakers Association who played for the Denver Broncos professional football team, and he heard me give my talk one time, and he came up to me and he said, he totally related to this idea of seeing the people with talent that never get there, because he saw it all the time in the NFL. He was like a 7th round draft choice or 12th round draft choice himself. Now he's in the Ring of Fame for the Denver Broncos, right? But he was the guy that knew how to persist.
Yes.
People that had greater talent didn't. Yeah.
Now, what would you say to your younger self?
Have some fun. Have some fun, relax and have some fun. You know, I was able to achieve many of the things I did because I not only had success as a Taekwondo athlete, but I was also a Division I football player in the United States. And I went, that's how I got through college, was on a football scholarship. But there were so many times that I was so nervous and wrapped up with the fear of failure that I didn't get to enjoy the experience. And I really believe that that had a negative impact on my overall performance. Even though I performed well, I could have done better. If I would have been able to basically balance that thin edge, right, of intensity and enjoyment, intensity and relaxation, that's what I would tell my youngest self. Relax, have some fun, still work hard, still be intentional, but enjoy the process, because I didn't as much as I could have.
Such wise advice. Now tell me about black belt leadership, because that's something that you do in the corporate environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. Well, you know, I've been a martial arts teacher and practitioner for over 47 years. And I always like to say I started in the womb.
So you started when you were 2.
That's that right? Yeah. But the idea there is that I realized that, you know, I saw so many people make these powerful transformations in the martial arts studio based on these principles. But I also knew that I wanted to play personally a bigger game. And what I realized is these principles that I'm able to share, they apply to so many aspects of life. And you don't need to spend 5 or 10 years learning to be a martial artist in order to use those same principles. And so the whole idea of black belt leadership is being able to help people tap into what I call their inner champion, right? That intuitive sense within of being able to access that power and then just utilize some very simple principles. One you've already talked about, which is conscious persistence, being aware. Another is really getting clear on our purposeful vision. And then the final one is taking inspired action. And what I think that many of us, and I've experienced this as well, when we have something that we really want to accomplish, a big goal or a big obstacle, we look at it at its entirety, and it can become very overwhelming. But it's about being able to break it down and taking this consistent effort over time. And that's been my experience. You know, someone doesn't get to black belt in a couple days. It takes them 3 to 3.5 years of consistent effort. And I think that we oftentimes can give up too easily. And so being able to have at least those 3 principles is kind of the catalyst and the foundation of black belt leadership.
Now you have a new book, and you have an offer for anyone that's listening that would like to get some.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I just have a copy right here, Catherine. So yeah, this is a book. My second book, entitled Breaking Through. My first book is called Black Belt Leadership, but Breaking Through came as a result of, I do a corporate board breaking experience workshop. So I go into corporations and I help them identify a breakthrough area that they either want to have collectively or individually. And they actually write it on the side of a board. And then they flip it over. And on the other side, I take them through a process to identify their limiting beliefs that have caused them to not achieve that goal. And then I systematically take them through on how to break that board. And they literally announce it in front of a room what their breakthrough is in their limiting belief. And I often wondered, I see people all the time that have gone through this process and they're like, oh, that was such a great experience. That board is still in my office. And I often wondered, but did they ever really have the breakthrough? Mm-hmm. Or did they just break a piece of wood with me and feel really good about that? Yes. So I said, well, what would I do if I was coaching someone on how to have a breakthrough? And that's what this book is. So I have 3 winning strategies to create breakthroughs. I call it, of clarifying your vision, and then also, creating your plan, and then finally taking consistent action. And each one of those sections has 3 to 4 chapters that helps you drill down. So the offer, and thanks so much for allowing me to share, is you can get it on Amazon if you want to order it and download it, or actually order the hard copy. But if your listeners would like to receive the free download of the introduction, they can either go to my website, chrisnatzke.com. That's CHRIS. NATZ as in zebra, KE.com, and they can download the free chapter. Or if they want to text the word breakthrough, just the word breakthrough, to 720-741-6263. That's 720-741-6263. They can also get the downloadable chapter there.
And that's if they're in the US.
That's if they're in the US. If they're out of the US, it's probably best to go to my website. But if they're in the US, they can definitely use that phone number.
And the website is down there below right now.
Okay. Excellent. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Chris, thank you again for spending another incredibly valuable. I don't know how long we've been here.
I don't know either. It's been fun though. It was great the last time as well. So that just got us warmed up,
about
right?
45 minutes. So thank you so much. I miss you, and I so appreciate you.
Oh, thanks so much. It was my honor, Catherine, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.